good afternoon, or good morning or good evening, depending where you are in the world. My name is Paco Pangalangan. I'm the Executive Director of Strat-Based ADRi Institute, and I'm happy to welcome you today to today's roundtable discussion that's part of Strat-Based ADRi's Foreign Policy Forum on the Indo-Pacific discussion series entitled Responding to Emerging Maritime Security Challenges in the Indo-Pacific. This event, this discussion is being organized by the Institute in partnership with the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany. With that, as we open this program, I did want to welcome our participants and let them know that there's a Q&A function where they can ask questions, and later on, after we hear from our keynote speakers, Professor Wolfram, and our discussants, we'll be having a Q&A portion later on. But before we get to all of that, may I please first turn you over to Professor Dino Manhit, I believe, for the opening remarks.
Good afternoon, Paco.
Good afternoon, Ram. Are you doing the closing or the opening?
I'm doing the closing, but happy to welcome everyone.
Okay.
Happy to welcome everyone. Welcome to all participants. I think we have seen some 70 registrations, so hopefully we can have them all in. But welcome to all participants, and we're looking forward to Professor Rutger's views and sharing later, and really happy to welcome two colleagues that we respect and leading thinkers, Dr. De Castro, Dr. Cabalsa, and of course, thank you, Ambassador Anki, for allowing us to be a co-host of this discussion. Any opportunity to discuss challenges in the Indo-Pacific, challenge especially that affects the Philippines, is very welcome by our institute. So again, welcome to our speaker, welcome to our reactors, welcome to colleagues and participants. Good afternoon, and you'll hear more from me as I react to all this when I close this event. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Professor Manhit. So that was Professor Manhit, the president of Strat-Based ADRi Institute, who delivered an impromptu welcoming remarks. I apologize for the mix-up there, and we'll be hearing more from him later on. But for now, getting back on program, I now move on to our keynote address. And our keynote address will be delivered by none other than Her Excellency Ambassador Anke Reifenstuhl, who has served as the ambassador of the German Embassy in Manila since 2019. From 2016 to 2019, she was the head of the Division of Humanitarian Assistance and Humanitarian Demining Operations at the Federal Foreign Office in Berlin. Ambassador Reifenstuhl has also worked in the diplomatic service since 1993, and her posting included the German embassies in London, New Delhi, Cairo, and of course now in Manila. So ladies and gentlemen, let me please turn over the virtual microphone to Ambassador Reifenstuhl for her keynote address. Ambassador?
Thank you very much, Paco, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone. Professor Dino Manhit, lieber Herr Professor Wolfram, Dr. Chester Cabalsa, and Dr. Renato De Castro, dear participants and guests, ladies and gentlemen. With the latest incident in the West Philippine Sea, today's panel discussion seems to be coming at the right time. Several statements by Philippine politicians yesterday and today condemn this incident as a violation of international maritime law and Philippine territorial sovereignty. However, this week's incident is just the latest one in a series of escalating security threats in the region that need to be addressed comprehensively and adequately. Threats to the maritime security underline the need for political commitment and a continued discussion on how to deal with the growing challenges to maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region. Incidents like the one reported just this week contribute to increasing tensions and to deteriorating the maritime security environment, as well as a threat to the peaceful development of the region. At the same time, it becomes evident that multilateral cooperation is the right way to address these challenges. Here in the Philippines, there is probably no other matter of this comprehensive relevance that has found so much public and political attention over the past years, and that has been as omnipresent as the West Philippine Sea issue. This maritime region, with all its resources and potential, as well as solving the issue of competing claims, are vital for the Philippines and the Philippine interests. By bringing the South China Sea case before the International Court of Arbitration in The Hague, the Philippine government demonstrated to be very much aware of this fact. At the same time, it underlined the strong commitment of the Philippines to multilateralism and to the respect and promotion of the international rules-based order and rules-based maritime order. The 2016 Arbitral Court's decision in favor of the Philippines confirmed this Philippine approach. The 2016 Arbitral Award in the South China Sea also confirms the relevance of a rules-based international maritime order in the context of increasing globalization and international relations. However, since the court's ruling of 2016, the actual situation on the ground has escalated, and the territorial sovereignty of the Philippines is being challenged by a worrying increase of incidents. It is not only the Philippines and the other littoral states of the South China Sea, but the whole international community that benefits from a peaceful, safe and stable South China Sea and Indo-Pacific region. The region with important maritime trade routes, the region that is rich of resources like fish, oil and gas, the region that also urgently requires our joint efforts and responsible action for preserving the biodiversity protection and the maritime environment protection. The 2016 Arbitral Award constitutes an essential basis for adequately addressing this complexity and the current challenging situation. It has paved the way for a peaceful conflict settlement and diplomacy, for addressing emerging maritime security challenges, and for multiple options of regional and multilateral cooperation and partnership. Asia and the Indo-Pacific region is of growing global economic and political as well as geostrategic importance. Against the background of the strategic rivalry between the US and China, it is obvious that the shape of tomorrow's international order will be decided in the Indo-Pacific region. Conscious of this situation, a reliable international rules-based maritime order is indispensable. UNCLOS provides this necessary comprehensive multilateral framework for a rules-based maritime order, as well as the adequate instruments and mechanisms, and it provides the basis for regional and global cooperation and partnerships in the marine domain. Bilateralizing the issues related to the South China Sea would mean not only challenging this international order, excluding relevant stakeholders and their legitimate interests, but also prevent international, regional, and multilateral cooperation, as well as fuel tensions. In its Indo-Pacific policy guidelines, the German government underlines the commitment to promote regional and international cooperation for the protection of a rules-based order firmly anchored within the United Nations. Germany remains a committed and responsible partner in the international endeavor to protecting and promoting this international rules-based order. Germany's commitment is based on our interest to safeguard peace and stability in the region and globally, as well as international cooperation and partnership, to protect the environment, to address climate change related issues, as well as to promote and protect shipping routes that are an essential precondition for open markets and free trade. In order to better understand the context and background of the arbitration case and the complex nature of its impact and potential, as well as to contribute to the cooperation and dialogue on how to address the current challenging situation, the German embassy initiated a lecture series with Professor Rüdiger Wolfram, and we are glad to contribute to this important debate with this excellent and internationally renowned law expert. Over the past years, Strait-based Institute has developed an impressive track record and expertise on the South China Sea issue, which has made it a key partner for dialogue and cooperation. The analysis and studies of Strait-based Institute and its broad network of experts have substantially contributed to an impressive and science and fact-based debate. I am confident that today's exchange will provide a useful contribution in this relation, and I wish us an interesting and inspiring session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And thank you for really framing today's discussion and for setting a foundation for the ideas that will be brought up as we move forward, especially for raising as well the issue of the importance and timeliness of this discussion given recent developments. So with that, thank you, Ambassador. And at this point, I would really like to introduce Professor Rudiger Wolfram, who will be delivering a lecture for us this afternoon on responding to emerging maritime security challenges in the Indo-Pacific. Professor Wolfram, as the ambassador said earlier, is the honorary director of the Max Planck Foundation, where he, over the years, has served as head of projects and as managing director. Moreover, he was previously appointed as judge at the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, and has also served as president of the tribunal. Professor Wolfram studied law at the University of Bonn. His research interests include constitutional law, international humanitarian law, human rights, international law of the sea, and legal pluralism. With that, I would like to now, I welcome Professor Wolfram. Good morning, sir, and the floor is yours. You're on mute, Professor.
Thank you very much for this introduction. To be very frank, after the introduction into this panel by Her Excellency, the Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to the Philippines, there's very little to say. She summarized the situation excellently, and I agree with her to 100%. I could stop at that point, but I believe that's not what the organizers intended me to do. And therefore, I'll put into some different words what has been said. Today's international law, or today's international relations, are growing and permanently growing into a rule-based order. In the situation we are facing in the moment, one should refer to the UN Charter, the Law of the Sea Convention, and the Arbitral Award on the South China Sea as sources for the applicable law. According to Article 33 of the UN Charter, any act which infringes the sovereignty of a state is in violation of the UN Charter. I don't have to go into details. The UN Charter was developed after the Second World War, and it was meant to reduce the possibilities that tensions would lead to another war. Therefore, the aggravation of an incident like this one, namely the stopping of the refurbishment of a police or military group, is certainly an illegal act, an act which is contrary to the UN Charter. There's not much needed to prove that. Apart from that, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, is, so to speak, the pillar, the constitution for the international relations at sea. In this in this respect, one has to say the following. The protection of security as provided for in the convention is meant to protect the territorial sovereignty of a state party. We have November here, and therefore it is after much speaking, my voice could be better. To put it this way, to block the bringing food, water, postal services and whatsoever to this station is a sovereign right of every state having sovereign claims in this area. Sure, if the People's Republic does not believe that the claim of the Philippines is valid, it is free to have these views, but it is not the real appropriate method to block this, to keep the connection with this group and to block it by warships. This is the wrong means and the wrong attitude. Instead, the People's Republic of China should bring that issue up before the International Court of Justice, who is the sovereign of this island. And this is the only way which has to be pursued according to Article 33 of the UN Charter. More I cannot say about the incident, but would allow me to say something about the topic in general. The topic speaks about new challenges. I'm a little bit uneasy about this topic. There are not so many new challenges. What has just been happening is an incident which could have happened even 100 years ago. These incidents do occur, although they are illegal and under the UN Charter clearly declared to be illegal. But there are new developments and they touch upon issues where coastal states have a certain temptation to act unilaterally. These are, for example, if a coastal state recognizes the use of underwater drones which penetrate into the territorial sea, or in the case at hand, the archipelagic waters. I'm fully aware, that everybody is, that this question is a severe one, for one doesn't know what these drones do. They are certainly in violation of the sovereignty of the state concerned. But here again, this is not the case for unilateral action. This is the case for multilateral responses, and this is what should be strengthened. As I've said yesterday, and I don't know to what extent it was reflected in the mass media, they were not over happy with what I've been saying. Please proceed to the regional cooperation which you have under ASEAN, and please proceed to multilateral systems. Do not, as the Philippines, react unilaterally, but rather encourage or insist that this dispute should be solved for international fora. And I believe it is now for ASEAN to get to take an initiative to appease or to modify or to downgrade the tension which is evidently existing in this area. Unilateralism in this respect will only aggravate the situation and create new challenges. It's a spiral, so to speak, of force and tension, which may lead to a war, although I'm pretty sure that will not happen. This is my pleading, so to speak, and I would think we should have a discussion on the means and the possibilities we have within ASEAN, we have within the region, and we have within the United Nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Wolfram. Yeah, so we really want, now that we've heard Professor Wolfram's lecture, and he raised very good points, and I saw both our discussants nodding at several points. I'm now excited to come to them and to hear what they want to share or react to Professor Wolfram's piece. So first up, our first discussant is Dr. Renato De Castro, who's a member of the Board of Trustees of Albert Del Rosario Institute for Strategic and International Studies, ADRi. He is a distinguished university professor in the International Studies Department of the De La Salle University. And he earned his PhD from the Government and International Studies Department of the University of South Carolina as a Fulbright Scholar in 2001, and obtained his BA and 2 master's degrees from the University of the Philippines. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor RDC.
Good afternoon to everyone. Good morning, Professor. Your presence remind me of one of the last countries I visited just before the pandemic happened was, of course, Germany. And I had a great time in Berlin, enjoying the fall weather and, of course, enjoying German breakfast, which probably you haven't had, but something I really enjoy when I'm in Germany, having German breakfast. Now, my discussion will focus on 2 things. Number one, of course, the importance of international law, especially in a region that is dynamic. And if I might engage you in a debate regarding ASEAN and the multilateral solution. So I agree with you. I have no disagreement of the importance of UNCLOS given the changes in our region. And this dynamics that's happening here, we're talking about what happened today, about 3 Chinese Coast Guard vessels blocking a Philippine supply ship. This is not new, this happened in 2014. What is new, of course, is the fact that in the statement mentioned by Secretary Locsin, he was very explicit about the fact that this incident might trigger a larger, dynamics. When he mentioned for the fact that in the light of the US-China strategic competition, the United States has been very vocal that, armed forces operating in the West Philippine Sea is now covered by the Mutual Defense Treaty, which adds another dynamics here. And of course, another dynamics when we're talking about the importance of international law, again, in the light of the arbitral ruling, and of course, in the US-China strategic competition, what happened last year was the United States State Department has basically adopted the arbitral ruling as the basis of its South China Sea policy. Of course, we have to understand it in the light of the US-China strategic competition. So the ruling has basically been affected by this dynamics. So this basically being used by the United States primarily to delegitimize China's expansive claims in the South China Sea and of course, Chinese actions in the South China Sea. Now, let me engage you, Professor, in a discourse regarding ASEAN. Well, I've been to Europe, I've been to Germany a couple of times, and I cannot help but, of course, be amused and sometimes view with a certain degree of cynicism when ASEAN is often mentioned as the panacea to this problem. We have to understand, Ambassador, that since 2012, ASEAN has been effectively divided. Well, there's already a dynamic in ASEAN given the expansion that happened in ASEAN in early 21st century, when ASEAN welcomed a number of continental countries who simply had nothing to do with the South China Sea issue. And of course, when China signed the declaration of the Code of Conduct with the Association of Southeast Asian Countries, and China's basically delayed the negotiation for the Code of Conduct, China has a veto power between ASEAN, thus effectively paralyzing ASEAN. So in fact, the decision of China to negotiate for a Code of Conduct with ASEAN in 2017 was primarily a reaction to the arbitral ruling that came out in 2016. And of course, the Code of Conduct, unlike the arbitral ruling, does not offer any solution to the South China Sea dispute. The Code of Conduct merely offers a system of managing. But of course, this will also depend on whose terms. From the Chinese position, the Code of Conduct would, of course, number one, be a dynamic simply between ASEAN and China, excluding other stakeholders, like for example, Japan, the United States, and even the European Union. So this is, of course, the challenge when we have to look at ASEAN as a. I'm not saying that ASEAN is basically helpless. What will be important, of course, is you still have countries within ASEAN that, of course, have interests with maritime issues. And of course, we have to be practical, given the fact that the next chairman of ASEAN was the same country who prevented a communique. First time that ASEAN was not able to come out with a chairman's communique was, of course, in 2012, when the chairman was, of course, Cambodia. And right now, of course, Cambodia will be again the chairman. So I don't think anyone in ASEAN is optimistic that something will happen with the South China Sea. But that doesn't basically ignore the importance of multilateral element. What is also happening here in the region is the emergence of what is called mini-laterals. Given the paralysis of inclusive regional organization like ASEAN, ASEAN Regional Forum, and the East Asian Forum, you have, of course, number one, the emergence of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. Then we also have the UNCLOS, and this is something I'm also studying, that the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue is, of course, having interaction with the European Union. My last paper that I presented about 3 months ago is, of course, the growing interaction between the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue and, of course, the European Union, and even, of course, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And a term used by a European scholar when we have this conference in September this year, the principal European countries that, of course, have maritime interests in the Indo-Pacific. Great Britain, of course, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. So this interplay of minilaterals, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, AUKUS, then of course Quad, the European Union and NATO, and the principal European maritime powers will add another dimension to the importance of multilateralism. I'm not saying that ASEAN is finished. Rather, ASEAN might not be enough. We need, of course, the active participation of other minilaterals, multilateral groupings that could ensure that multilateralism would prevent the prediction. I don't know if you remember Professor Aaron Friedberg of Yale University when he said in 1996, Europe's past might be Asia's future. Hopefully multilateralism would prevent that from happening in the 21st century. Thank you very much for your attention. Fish good.
Thank you, Dr. De Castro. With that, next up, we have our second discussant for this afternoon. Our second discussant is none other than Dr. Chester B. Cabalza, who is the president and founder of the International Development and Security Cooperation, or IDSC. He was formerly the executive fellow of the Council of Fellows and previously the vice president of the Center of Research and Strategic Studies at the Development Academy of the Philippines. Professor Cabalza is a teaches in the Graduate School at the University of the Philippines, and a faculty in charge in the earlier mentioned Development Academy of the Philippines. Dr. Cabalza holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of the Philippines, and also holds a degree in national security and policymaking under the stewardship of the University of Delaware. Dr. Chester Cabalza, good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Paco, for that kind introduction, and to, of course, to Professor Manhit for the kind invitation. Good morning, Professor Wolfram, and of course, now coming from the discussion on multilateralism and the role of UNCLOS that you provided for us, and of course, the legal basis of how we would conduct this conundrum, South China Sea conundrum, through the use of UNCLOS. Thank you for providing us with that legal explanation about that. And of course, to Dr. Castro's insights about the role of ASEAN, or can we rely with ASEAN, basically, given that we have these problems and issues also on the differing opinions of our ASEAN member states. What I'm gonna do perhaps is try to situate our discussion on the Indo-Pacific, and then where is the Philippines in that Indo-Pacific region, and how can we mitigate in terms of other alternatives on how to strengthen and respond to these maritime security issues, basically. And when we talk about the Indo-Pacific, basically, it has been gaining a significant traction in the international affairs as the region has moved towards the center stage in this global geopolitics. And with all the multiplexity in the region contributing to more than half of the world's population and the gross domestic product, we're talking about 1/3 flow of trade and energy passing through this region. So basically, we see the power competition also between the two superpowers, China and of course the US there. But also we've seen the introduction of major powers such as India and Japan, and the middle powers such as Australia, and basically some members of the ASEAN there. And definitely the Philippines holds a unique position in this geopolitical center of the Indo-Pacific there. And we have also seen that the United States has demonstrated a renewed importance to this Indo-Pacific region by significantly renaming the U.S. Pacific Command to the Indo-Pacific Command. That illustrates that the U.S. vision to secure a free and open region based on the established base order founded on liberal democratic values, institutions, and international law. But basically, it was Japan that was the first state to project that notion of open and free Indo-Pacific. And in definitely in 2007, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe called this zone as the seas of prosperity, governed by freedom, rule of law, and the market economy, and that would be free from force and coercion, which is contrary to what we have seen today in the West Philippine Sea, basically. And of course, for India, that is their vision and version of the Indo-Pacific that coincides with the great power aspiration, and it serves as an extension of its look east. Now they call it the Act East policy. And of course, it was discussed in our conversation about the role of ASEAN members here, where they have taken more of a functional outlook towards the Indo-Pacific, basing its strategy on the 4 aspects of maritime cooperation, connectivity, sustainable development, and basically the economy. But of course, for China, Indo-Pacific basically is mostly pessimistic from their point of view, and it assumes that this promotion of the Indo-Pacific would definitely serve as a platform to contain its rise. Now, where is the Philippines in that discourse of the Indo-Pacific? One is that the proximity of the Philippines and China and definitely Japan also provides with its access to vital sea routes for commerce. And being at this entrance of this maritime Southeast Asia, the Philippines has cemented its geopolitical role, and not only in the sub-region, but also in the greater Indo-Pacific region. Now, there are several geopolitical importance of the Philippines in this Indo-Pacific region here. First is that the Philippines is a traditional ally of the US and has forged robust strategic partnership. Of course, despite the shifting rhetoric and perception towards the US, especially under this administration, the significance of the US in the Philippine foreign policy cannot be simply discarded. And in fact, in the national security policy from 2017 to 2022, it says there and describes the US as the only superpower in the world and the stabilizing force in the region. And of course, we know for a fact that with the statement of Secretary, DFA Secretary Locsin this morning, that of course the use of MDT, of course, is of course in this current how would I say it, current problem with China right now. And the second point is that the Philippines is also a key claimant in the South China Sea dispute, as we all know. And despite winning the historic maritime case against China, which the ambassador discussed earlier, the Philippines continues to sideline the tribunal victory due to its careful engagement with Beijing. But lately, we've seen some developments on our engagements with Washington. And in line with this, China continues to maintain artificial islands in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, which I think that has become, even after the elections, Philippine elections, we will see this kind of scenario, basically. And also, the Philippines, despite the Philippines being a founding member of ASEAN, as discussed by Dr. De Castro, we see some schism and confusion among ASEAN members because of how they backed China, vis-a-vis also the US, and we see a hegemonic rivalry in this region. Basically, it's going to be it's like a consort of Europe back then in 18th century, as what we see now in Southeast Asia as a battleground of this hegemonic rivalry between the US and China, basically. And basically, Indo-Pacific provides the Philippines with an opportunity, being a natural gateway to the East Asian economies and having one of the most active and resilient economies in the region, hopefully. Now, how do we deal with this problem like the West Philippine Sea? Of course, we've been doing a lot of things on the Filipino modernization. It comes into three horizons. Basically, it started in 2013 and until 2017. We are now in the second phase of it from 2018 until next year. And then by 2023 until 2028, we're hoping that we will achieve a full potential of a respectable maritime power, basically. And the Philippines still has a lot of ground cover. It will substantially spend a lot of money, at least $4 billion in defense per year, amounting to 1.4% of the country's gross domestic product, basically. And during the peak of the pandemic, Secretary Lorenzana said that vital infrastructures were built in the Calayan Island Group, Sulu Sea, Philippine Sea, West Philippine Sea for territorial defense operations, and the AFP also strengthened its presence in the eastern seaboard in the Fuga Island, despite of what happened this the event of what happened this morning. And basically, we've seen that some problems so far in the maritime challenges of the country. Now, maybe last few points here. The dream of having that defense posture is for the Philippines to at least have that submarine program, which we wanted to have that since the 1950s, and only in 2010, the Philippine Navy refilled its plans to acquire submarines as part of its follow-up plan of the ongoing AFP modernization program. Although we're not saying that once we have this submarine, it will help us protect our sovereignty in its total, but it's just it will not achieve the deterrence to Chinese maritime power, but at least it can be considered as a showcase for conventional deterrence capability as IDLC denial assets. Of course, we've seen Indonesia, Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, and even Myanmar have already that submarine. And of course, a majority of the maritime nations in this region can use it as an alternative for defense for Chinese stabilization beneath the blue seas. Now, the problem here, even if we have that dream, is the current specification of the base facility in the Philippines, because it was designed in the World War II era legacy ship. So really, we have to transform our naval assets and, of course, foster multilateralism. And as mentioned by Dr. De Castro, the many of course, our engagement with ASEAN, despite all the dynamics within the members, and of course, the hegemonic rivalry between China and the US there. But more than that, I think what we should focus more on building this defense posture is the technological advancement that has been affecting the maritime world. And as a result, the security landscape of the global region has shifted dramatically, and many states are basically challenging the stability of the power regions, predominantly the Pacific, attempting to destabilize this prevailing security order. So I hope that, of course, with the Quad and the AUKUS, I hope that more engagements will be done, and definitely we're looking forward for your questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Chester. So thank you to both Dr. Chester and Dr. Renato, and of course, Professor Wolfram for sharing your ideas with us this afternoon. Now we've come to that point of the program where we actually opened the floor up for questions from our now 294 participants. Significant increase since we started at 2 o'clock today, and it just shows really the importance and the relevance of our discussion today. So I encourage our participants to use the Q&A function of Zoom to send in any questions you may have, and we'll give you a few moments to do that. But in the meantime, I feel like I should first ask Professor Wolfram if there's anything that he wanted to respond off the bat to what our discussants raised. If not, I also have some questions here that have been sent to me through email. So Professor Wolfram, just let me know. Okay, well, in that case, I have a question.
I would like to raise an additional question or comment. We are so far very clear that one should seek a solution on a regional or multilateral level, theoretically, but it has been stated that ASEAN is not an efficient mechanism in the moment due to the, let me put it this, the distribution of powers within ASEAN. If that is correct, you are the judges on that, then I may raise with those who are politically responsible in this region, why have they not undertaken every effort to ensure that ASEAN can play the role it was meant to play? This is an issue which is in the hands of the politicians. They should seek alliances and should keep ASEAN properly informed. This is, however, looking backward, and I'm more inclined to look forward. My question is, if ASEAN is not efficient or willing to help as described, has a cooperation been established with Indonesia, with Malaysia, with Vietnam? They're all in the same situation with the Philippines. I would recommend that you should seek the cooperation and the full support of these states, which have or should have their competitors to a certain extent, have the same interests. One could even bring this up to an issue which I have not so far introduced, but I thought about. Could you imagine that one forms to establish a treaty between Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, perhaps also Brunei, to appoint a chairman and to bring an advisory opinion according to Article 138 of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea concerning the sovereignty of these features which are in dispute? Think about it. It is a rather thorny way and has been undertaken only once, but you have the following benefits. First, an advisory opinion is not binding, but still legally, I mean, but it can be made binding, as UNCLOS has proven with the advisory opinion given by the by the ICJ in respect Mauritius versus the United Kingdom, the Chagos Archipelago issue. That is at least worth elaborating on. In an advisory opinion, many states are to be heard. This advisory opinion is commented, the last one on fisheries was commented by more than 30 states, whereas in an arbitration you have only 2 parties. I can only put that on the table, think about it. The alternative is try to get a view of the UN General Assembly. The Security Council, you have no chance. I don't have to explain that. That's another alternative. There was some mentioning of the US. That's an outside power. And it's very questionable whether outside powers would not result in aggravating the situation. Therefore, I would rather be careful. I would rather seek the cooperation with a power which is perhaps not in this region, but has vital interests in this region, with Japan. For Japan is depending on the freedom of navigation, and therefore there is a valid interest. These are my recommendations for the discussion and for internal considerations, perhaps after we have had this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wolfram. I see Dr. De Castro is raising his hand. Did you want to respond to that?
May I take this opportunity to respond to Professor Waldron points? Number one, when you mention about ASEAN, the challenge for ASEAN, of course, is that operates on the basis of unanimity. So if one of those countries, especially those continental Southeast Asian countries, would object, that's the end of ASEAN. So that's basically the challenge for ASEAN. When you talk about this coalition of the willing, this was actually tried. In 2014, the Philippines, under the current administration, hosted supposed to be a meeting of ASEAN countries who have, of course, maritime issues. Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia is not a claimant state. So as much as possible, Indonesia doesn't want to get involved with the South China Sea issue, although it is a stakeholder. A small Southeast Asian country did not attend. There's a number of reasons why. The small Southeast Asian country also has a maritime issue with China, but relies simply on one commodity for export, and that's oil. So this country did not attend. The problem, of course, with this coalition of the willing, again, Professor, what happened, of course, since 2016 and recently, the country who filed the case against China, who won the case, the president of that country decided to set the ruling aside until last year. So this basically prevented the possibility of a coalition when the country itself that won the case. The president decided to set the ruling in 2016 simply to get economic assistance for China for its massive infrastructure project. This country only acknowledged the ruling, and thank God we have Foreign Secretary Teodoro Locsin, when he, of course, finally acknowledged the ruling last year. So for almost 4 years, the ruling had been set aside. The irony is that Indonesia and Malaysia and even Vietnam had basically used the ruling when they declared, of course, their this continental shelf. The Philippines only acknowledged the ruling last year, so that's basically prevented the country. Now, the point regarding, of course, the when you talk about the challenge of an the external actor, the reality of the region, the Indo-Pacific region, is that I think just like Europe, our maritime security is, of course, buttressed by an external maritime power, and that's the United States. Ideally, the region would conform to international law. But in a region like the Philippines, international law could not exist only by itself. It also have to be based on MAC-politik, on power politic. So this is a reality. International law could only be enforced. It's backed up by naval power, and of course, the reality in the region is the fact that the offshore strategic balancer is, of course, extended here by the 7th Fleet of the United States. So this is the dynamics. As much as possible, ideally, this problem could be solved by the countries in the region, but then we would fall into the Chinese dream. The Chinese dream, as stated by President Xi Jinping, is that Asian problems should be solved by Asians alone. So if the countries in the region would have to resolve it, large part of the solution will be coming from the most powerful and largest country in the region, and that's China. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Professor De Castro. Dr. Chester?
Yeah, basically, I subscribe to most of the ideas of Dr. Castro regarding the ASEAN way. It's a cultural factor that we have to consider in deciding many issues in Southeast Asia that has a different way compared to European way of resolving issues here. I think the culture of consultation and non-interference has to be overhauled, basically looking at the ASEAN centrality here, because whenever we decide for contentious security issues in the region, we have to consult each one of the countries here. And once a country disagrees, then definitely it's a no-no for everyone. So I think that the problem has to basically change, knowing that if we try to look at Southeast Asia, majority of the people here in this region are from Generation Z, already the woke generation, and these kinds of overhauling in the culture must have to change, basically, so that it should attune to the changing times, and basically we have to really decide on things that really matter to the survival of ASEAN. So basically that's how I see it.
Thanks, Dr. Cabalza. So before I move on there have been a few questions. I did want to read, before we leave this topic, there's a comment here by Mr. Henry Bensurto, and that's: despite the limitations of ASEAN, it still serves a good purpose towards rule of law and the enforcement of the arbitral ruling. For example, when the Philippines embarked on its internationalization of the SCS issue in 2010, the SCS issue was a taboo subject. It was never part of the official agenda of ASEAN. However, when the Philippines showed consistency in its position, including in 2012, when it refused to give in to Cambodia's position not to include the matter of Scarborough Shoal in the joint statement. There's a continuation below, joint statement. Therefore, the SCS issue has been officially part of the ASEAN agenda to this day. Thus, we have to be realistic insofar as the limitations of ASEAN, but it can still form part of an integrated, comprehensive, and holistic approach in putting pressure to China. Your thoughts, please. Warmest regards, Judge Wolfram. So I thought that I'd jump to this comment / question just in case anybody had reactions to that. Yes, Professor Wolfram.
Thank you very much. I'm fully aware that some of the problems you are facing at the moment is due to the fact which has been described. I'm aware of that, was aware of that, but I didn't want to mention it. That the former Philippines government or the president set aside the award and therefore heavily weakened the position of the Philippines. We were saying in Germany, you should wield the iron when it's still very hot. That's the opposite was done. Now, still, look into the other alternatives I've provided you and or suggested to you. Evaluate legally whether it is prudent and promising to ask for an advisory opinion. You can see that these advisory opinions can be quite powerful. However, I'm also aware that the People's Republic of China is very well connected. Therefore, this is complicated. But don't only raise the problems you're seeing and which you have been facing in the past, but try to be innovative. Still, a cooperation with Vietnam, Malaysia, even Indonesia. Sure, there are have the tendency to stay aside. Try to convince them, for otherwise, the South China Sea is totally governed by the People's Republic of China. That means that also Indonesia will suffer. Therefore, to try to forge a coalition of those in the region where the interests are directly involved or only marginally involved is still the best option you are having. Apart from that, ASEAN provides for the possibility of dispute settlement by conciliation, as you know better than I do. There is a full code for how to undertake conciliation under ASEAN. Have you tried to make use of this code? Sure, here again, you will face the opposition. But if you don't try it, then other states will not see where you stand.
Thank you, Professor Wolfram. Perhaps this is a good time I'm loving how the discussion is going, but I think it's a good time to go to one of the questions from our audience, and I'll just read it here. The question is it in the best interest of the Philippines to encourage and/or welcome freedom of navigation operations by the US, UK, and Australia in the contested South China Sea? What will be the implications for regional security or insecurity? Thank you. Would anybody like to respond?
Please add another question. Would it be a promising avenue that the Philippines government offers to the people of the Republic of China to negotiate a joint venture in the South China Sea? Become active, not reactive, please.
Okay, so Dr. Cavaza?
Yeah, actually, there was a precedence with that. There was a joint maritime exploration with China and Vietnam before. I don't know which year was that, but generally, what happened there was a high mistrust and distrust among each other, and it ended in the not so good terms. And basically, because of that precedence, the Philippines have learned a lesson from that. That still, when it comes to trusting China, we still don't have that level. And basically, even if we wanted to have our scientists to engage with them, the experiences that we got from China traumatize us basically. So I think the kind of a jointness, whether it be on scientific exploration or some military cooperation, is still a big question mark for us. Now, what can we? What are the interventions towards that? Basically, we should ask China to be more open to us and definitely to recognize basically the Hague ruling, because that's the only way that this kind of conundrum will be resolved. Otherwise, if China will not recognize the legal victory of the Philippines, even if we have the next president next year until the next generation, that's going to be a big problem for our bilateral security relationship. We need to heal each other, and by healing, China has to recognize this big legal victory of the Philippines.
Thanks, Dr. Chester. Dr. De Castro?
Responding to Professor Wolfram regarding the joint development, there are actually two models of joint development. Number one is the Chinese model, which has been offered by Deng Xiaoping, and the other one that has been negotiated since 2019, what you call service contracting. So let me just discuss the challenge regarding the Chinese model. The basic problem with the Chinese model is that once you engage China in a negotiation for joint development, you have to accept China's undisputable claim on the South China Sea. That's a non-starter. So basically, this is a major concession that China will ask you just to start a negotiation. The prospect for a service contracting became possible actually just before the pandemic. we have this company, a private company, the PNOC, that was supposed to service contract a Chinese company. I forgot the name, Sinok company, wherein they will be conducting a joint development of the reed bank. The negotiation was already there. The Chinese basically asked, let's study this contract. Later on, probably they realized that once they enter into service contracting with a Filipino company, then they will be recognizing the fact that the reed bank is under Philippine jurisdiction. So they just use the pandemic as an excuse not to sign that service contract. So it's back to square one. Now, the challenge, of course, regarding just reacting, of course, to whether China would recognize the arbitral ruling or not, my bet is not. China is a great power. China sees itself as a great power. As any great power in history, it will basically ignore international law. Well, it will go against its interests. That's not our problem. Our problem is basically to push for the arbitral ruling to form a coalition of countries that will hopefully balance, China's effort to effect its maritime expansion. Ambassador, can I raise this question to you? I'm sorry, Professor. I have noticed, of course, a growing interest on the part of the European Union, along, of course, with the quadrilateral security dialogue, and of course, even members of NATO. A number of NATO countries have already came out with their Indo-Pacific strategy, indicating a growing interest of Europe in the region. Will you encourage that effort, Professor? That Europe will be, I look at the European Union as the symbol of civilian power. Will civilian power in the Indo-Pacific region make a difference?
Frankly speaking, I don't see the European Union to play an active role. But I'm an academic, not a politician, and therefore you should best address Ambassador Reifenstuhl or others to tell you what the EU is all about in words and in activities. There are two things which one should clearly distinguish. If you believe that China will not start negotiating, for it is also for China a frustrating situation in the moment, then the EU certainly will not help you. And whether you want to rely on the US in permanence, it's up to politicians to decide. I have, after what has been happening recently, I'm not very optimistic on that, and democratic countries are occasionally, when there's a change of government, there may be also a change of position. For example, and please don't mention NATO in this context. NATO has no competences in the Indo-Pacific region, period. They might like to have it, but that's a totally different matter. I would rather recommend to you to collect your forces regionally. You are better off, but that's a layman's suggestion.
Okay. Thanks, Professor Wilson.
Ambassador Reifenstuhl is again on the screen. Ask her about the EU. I decline answering.
I completely agree with you when it comes to NATO, but of course I have to disagree with you when it comes to the EU. I mean, speaking of multilateralism, it can only enrich and support the Philippine case, or the case of multilateralism, if the EU as a strategic dialogue partner comes in. But we really have to differentiate and to spell out and spell down what measures make sense for the EU and what kind of activities. If we look at from a military perspective, This is different than from civilian approaches and aspects. So of course, it wouldn't really make a difference that supports the multilateral approach to bring in the EU as a strategic partner with the EU and its Indo-Pacific guidelines and growing commitment to engage and to increasingly engage in the region. It would not only make sense, but also welcome and confirm the commitment that has been made by the EU.
Thanks, Ambassador. Dr. De Castro, you have your hand up.
How about the third actor, supposed to be the principal European powers? Will they play a role? The principal,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I don't
Germany,
know whether I'm
Germany is part of that,
being,
the principal European powers.
I mean,
Okay.
we shouldn't differentiate between several states and powers within the EU, but the EU and its member states, with all the contributions and the added value each of one might have and has, should be considered, and it really has an added value.
Thank you, Ambassador. Actually, I was just about to ask, since you practically have joined the panel effectively, I was about to ask on what areas of maritime security can the Philippines and Germany cooperate, but I'm not sure. I think you've already covered that with your past statement. So thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for the great discussion, everybody. Let me turn now again to our pool of questions here from our participants. Okay, we have one here. It's I think it's talking about the recent developments in the Philippines, and the question is it a good action if the president? Sorry, let me do that again. Is it a good action if the present Philippines will do nothing again with regards to the latest PROC action against the Philippine supply sortie? Will the inaction help the Philippines in the future due to this government's unilateral action in the past and the coming Philippine elections, change of government? So it's a question related to what's been happening recently. Dr. Chester, would you perhaps want to weigh in?
Yeah, of course. No, there was a precedent when the Chinese Coast Guard tried to provoke our soldiers and Coast Guard there, and it seems like Filipino soldiers are very clever. They don't like to provoke any coercion with China, because once they do that, they know that it would create a shooting war in the region. But basically, it was a joke from the Philippine Navy and Coast Guard, basically, that once China does that to them, they bring shampoo with them to take a bath. Just a joke, but basically trying to be serious about it. It has been an action of China to provoke us, and once you bite their provocation, tendency-wise, it would only create an havoc of eruption of definitely conflict here. But clearly, what we should do is to file for diplomatic protest. This is the best action that we can do, and of course to pressure the international community of what China is doing to us. We have to create a lot of noises and tell to the world that this is not acceptable in the maritime rules-based norms, basically. And definitely the Philippines should really rally with its conviction that we have to fight for our territorial integrity and maritime sovereignty and then national sovereignty.
If I may share, I was in the National Security Council when that happened in 2017, the first time the Chinese Coast Guard blocked our resupply vessel. What we did, it's basically a game with the Chinese. You simply have to outwit them. And in 2017, we outwitted them by sending a smaller ship, and the captain of the ship is familiar with the waters. So what that smaller ship did, outrigger did, was to pass through the rocky area wherein the Chinese Coast Guard vessels, since they're bigger, and they have still what they call this, hulls, they were not able to chase. So it's actually a mind game. This is how the Chinese play it, the gray zone operation. So it's a matter of outwitting each other. So this is basically how we should have we should play with it again. So it was really very tense at that time. I could still remember at that time, PACOM wanted also to enter the fray, but this will only complicate the situation. So what we did was something very simple: send a smaller ship, and of course a navigator who's familiar with the rock formation near Ayungin Shoal. Okay.
That's interesting. Interesting. Thanks, RDC. Thank you, Dr. De Castro and Dr. Cabalza. Turning again to the questions from our participants. Now we have 355 of them joining us. So welcome. I'm looking more for the questions. So we have here, okay, we have one, it's a follow-up question. If FONOPS, I think I'm pronouncing that right, FONOPS, in the South China Sea serve to balance power in the region and give some sense of security to those who are wary of China, then why will Australia have some reservations in conducting FONOPS in contested maritime areas? How do we enforce the rules-based approach without offending China as a biggest trading partner of most countries in the region? Thank you.
If I may, yeah,
Sure, please.
That's a big risk for Australia, basically, even if they are part of the Quad and the AUKUS lately. I think Australia is considered as a traditional middle power. It's not a great power as China or India and the US, basically. So the moment they do that, we will see a shooting war in the region, and definitely it's too risky for Australia to do it. And what we are advocating here is maritime school space. Even China lately has been recognizing the FONOPS in their narratives already. So I think those are the challenges that we have to consider also, because we have to be very careful with the FONOPS here, freedom of navigation and overflight, because tendency-wise, if everyone does it, basically it would create a lot of conflict in the region. But of course, what is important here is that we should continue with these conversations and definitely contextualize the rules of engagements. That's the reason why we have to address the code of conduct, which we think will be completed by next year. But the problem here, it's going to be, there will be an upper hand coming from Beijing on the context and the subtext of the code of conduct if you're trying to look at the strength of multilateralism here. But of course, like what was mentioned in the discussion, unilateralism also, when it comes to diplomacy, should be given importance here.
Thanks, Dr. Chester. I have a question here. I think I can direct this one to Professor Wolfram. And the question is, states have different strategic interests and foreign policy priorities, which lead to conflicting views on maritime security. Thus, how should the international community approach multilateral cooperation to make maritime security more responsive and effective? Professor?
The international community has its mechanisms and institutions to approach security issues. One is classical, that's a Security Council, if you wish. But on the scale of maritime issues, I believe the right forum is the IMO. Many issues which are now considered security threats. And a couple of days ago, I said one should not use the reference to security to broaden the competences of the coastal states. I'm against unilateralism in this respect. The Law of the Sea Convention is based upon multilateralism, nothing else. Therefore, I would recommend for states, if they feel there is a security threat, to first and foremost approach IMO to put the issue on the agenda. Nobody is really pressing for that in respect of underwater drones, which is a new security issue. Make sure that the IMO deals with that, provides a code of conduct, how they are to be used, how to cooperate with the coastal states, etc. Such an approach to IMO can hardly be blocked, and what you would get is another, perhaps, legal framework which would help you to deal with that issue. Therefore, my answer is simple. Security threats should be dealt with on a multilateral level. I can repeat that to every single question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. De Castro, I see your hands up.
Yes, I have a follow-up question to Professor Fulcrum. Professor Fulcrum, you have not reacted, for example, with this sort of coalition of the willing type of organizations that are emerging in the Indo-Pacific. Two of them, of course, I mentioned earlier. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which is made up of Japan, Australia, India, and the United States, and recently, of course, AUKUS. What is your view regarding the so-called minilaterals?
Well, if that's a way to deal with issues, perfectly all right. It's definitely better than unilateralism. But if you get IMO engaged, it's again better.
Okay, thanks, Professor. We're getting towards the end of our designated time for our open forum. So at this point, I just wanted to ask if any of either Professor Wolfram, Dr. De Castro, or Dr. Chester had any last words or last points that they would like to raise. Perhaps Professor Wolfram would like to talk more about multilateralism even more, but please, I'd like to go first, perhaps.
Thank you very much. That's kind of you to give me the first. It's like a poisoned apple. I have made my point very clearly. Unilateral actions, whatever they are, which means have been used, are being used, be it sanctions, embargoes, actions against diplomats or whatsoever, have never, ever solved the problem. They have only produced an aggravation of the situation. Therefore, I would propose to cut that down and instead go more into multilateralism, and if you believe it is helpful, also in a regional multilateralism, if you want to call it that way. But here again, the region should embrace those who belong to the region, not only those who get engaged for their own individual purposes. Therefore, if you call in the EU has a particular interest, but these are not the interests of the states of the region, the Pacific region, or Indo-Pacific region, as you call it. Therefore, no states and no group of states acts as a beneficiary for other interests. They always have their own agenda. And therefore, you should, as much as possible, get the regional challenges into the hand of those states in the region. That is my last word.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Chester, would you like to go next?
Yeah, we should always remember that when we talk about the security dynamics in this wide-ranging Indo-Pacific region, we should always remember the VUCA concept in security, that it's vulnerable, uncertain, and complex and ambiguous, that it is. And basically, as we go along with this discussion, we will see more complex issues, and definitely it should be addressed in a complex way with our answers also, and definitely it keeps on changing. So there's no monolithic and a monopoly of answer to these very complex questions that we have discussed so far. And I think that at the end of the day, we have to encourage China to embrace multilateralism. And I think China is not the only superpower here. There are many powers so far, and it has to respect the maritime rules-based and the rules-based norms basically that we all embrace. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cabalza. Dr. De Castro.
Yeah, I'll end my talk with a question to make sure that this forum would end with Dr. Fallroom with having the last word.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Fallroom, we have an agreement earlier that the cost of multilateralism and of course the July 12 arbitral ruling suffered because the country that won the case decided to set it apart. Now, my question is it too late for the Philippines to use the arbitral ruling as a rallying point for a multilateral solution to the South China Sea problem? And if it's not too late, what will be your advice to the Philippines?
You missed a couple of years. It's difficult to undo that, but it's not too late. I have recently realized that a case which is now 200 years old, the Gris-Bardana case, is still a very, very important element in the discussion about delimitation and claims. Therefore, it's never too late. But the government of the Philippines must get active in this respect and show to the world surrounding the Indo-Pacific region that they mean it, that they want to play a dominant role, and that they would rely on the arbitral award, the statements of the award, and the reasoning of the award. And as long as this is not made clear to the public, your position remains rather weak, and you are restricted to point-by-point reactions, which is not sufficient and not efficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wolfram. Thank you also to Dr. De Castro for the assist and in setting it up so nicely for the last word to come from Professor Wolfram. So again, thank you to our two discussants, Dr. Chester and Dr. De Castro for sharing your time with us today. And of course, thank you to Professor Wolfram. I know that you were feeling a bit under the weather, but we did not notice it all, and it was a great and very insightful discussion. So now I would like to now turn to Professor Dindo Manhit, the president of Strat-Based ADR Institute, to officially close today's discussion with his closing statement. Professor Dindo, Professor Manhit.
Paco, thank you. But big thanks also to Professor Rutger Wolfram, to our friends, active supporters of the Institute, Dr. Renato De Castro, Dr. Chester Cabalza, of course, for the German Embassy led by Her Excellency Ambassador Anki, but more importantly, to the 375 participants that we have had this afternoon. I hope you learned a lot. You appreciated the very honest, open discussion that our speakers, reactors have provided. But allow me to share my thoughts. In Strat-Base, we have always advocated and promoted multilateral cooperation towards a peaceful, prosperous, and a stable Indo-Pacific region. The inherent multipolarity of the Indo-Pacific has produced complex security challenges that continue to underscore the importance of multilateral and inclusive cooperation among states. Shaped by existing and emerging complex security threats, such as gray zone operations, maritime terrorism, and environmental degradation. There's a need for a more careful and deeper understanding of the region's evolving security architecture. Moreover, gaining renewed insights on the internal security concerns of the Philippines will allow our political leaders and experts to effectively respond to the existing and emerging security concerns of the Filipino country. The Strat-based ADR Institute firmly believes that the future of the Indo-Pacific lies in the multilateral and inclusive cooperation among like-minded states in the region, from Japan, India, Australia, United States, and others that share a rule-based value. The publication of Germany's policy guidelines for the Indo-Pacific highlights the growing importance of the region, not only for Asia, but also for Europe. The various Indo-Pacific strategies complement each other and must be seen as creating additional channels for cooperation, rather than suggesting alternative cooperation approaches in the region. In the context of the Philippines, security threats in the West Philippine Sea have continued to challenge the country's national security and territorial integrity. For instance, just this week, the most recent incident in Ayungin Shoal of the Kalayaan Island Group was a direct violation of Philippine maritime laws and jurisdiction. Through acts of aggression like this, China is undermining the country's sovereignty and the livelihoods of Filipino fisher folks. Given these challenges, coupled with the region's evolving security architecture, the Filipino people should remain vigilant against any attempt by foreign countries to encroach on the country's jurisdiction. The upcoming May 2022 election is an opportunity to move away from this appeasement policy. As some observers even use the word subservient policy towards China that permits aggressive attacks against Filipinos, and to elect national leaders who will remain committed to protecting the country's national security and sovereignty in the disputed territory. The Philippines must be firm in its commitment to safeguarding its territory by building a stronger and more responsive foreign and security policy. It must leverage and strategize through existing multilateral alliances and partnership, a regional mechanism to defend its territorial integrity and contribute to the international effort to a free and open Indo-Pacific. Advancing strategic partnership is relevant to uphold and protect international laws, treaties, and policies in the preservation of a rule-based maritime order. Upholding the UNCLOS, the 2016 arbitral victory, are significant steps towards maintaining this order. A vast network of alliances and the effective implementation and integration of regional policies can also effectively manage dynamic power shifts and the emergence of various security threats in the region. It is through these policies that the illegal and hostile acts in the West Philippine Sea can be addressed in accordance with the democratic principles that should govern the Indo-Pacific region. As new and complex security concerns continue to evolve, so does the need for policies and strategies to converge and for states to cooperate to deter any aggressive actions in the region and to advance a more peaceful, prosperous, stable, and Indo-Pacific. With the question of Dr. Rene de Castro, is it too late for the Philippines? It is not too late. There's always an election where we can change policies and leaders and move forward in the service of the Filipino people and the Filipino nation. Again, good afternoon, and thank you to all who watched, participated in this afternoon's virtual town hall discussion.
Thank you, Professor Manhit. Thank you to our speakers, to Professor Wolfram, to Professor De Castro, Dr. Gabalza. And thank you also to our partners in organizing today's event, the German Embassy here in Manila. This event has been recorded and will be shared on social media, I believe, through our Facebook and YouTube channels. So thank you very much. And with that, we officially close the event, and thank you all for sharing your time with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you,
Thank you,
Professor.
Ambassador. Thank you,
Professor.
Professor.
Chris Scott, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ambassador Chris Scott.